Hello and welcome everybody. I thought the best way to present you all 18 legendary items in Everspace 2 is to talk about the items while sorting them into a tier list. I do have collected and tested all of the items and will sort them by how powerful and useful they are. Of course, this is my personal judgment. Feel free to disagree and point out the use cases I have not mentioned. I am pretty sure I did not catch all possible combinations to make a specific item shine. I try to judge them by general usefulness, so is it more a niche item or is it helpful in any scenario? And of course, how powerful a legendary weapon or equipment is on its own and with its specific synergies. In general, I think that Everspace 2 nailed the legendary loot experience for players. Not only are the items usually very powerful and have high base stats, but they also decided to give every legendary item a unique feature, setting them further apart from their regular counterparts. Let's get going. Final Reckoning. Kicking this list off is a real banger. The autocannon has superior damage stats and charges up above that will let your next secondary weapon shot deal 500% increased damage. On the positive side, we have the high base damage and how quickly the charge is built up due to the high fire rate. Especially bomber pilots can constantly build charges and fire a secondary weapon without ammunition loss. Even standard missiles become extremely lethal with this buff, but the autocannon works really well for all classes. On the negative side, we have the very high energy drain and that the low energy damage prevents it from being a better weapon for all situations. Nevertheless, this is a strong and very fun to use weapon with a mechanic that you can easily integrate. A very solid A tier for me. Devotion. Next up we have the coil gun Devotion with an extremely high base damage, but it also drains 5% of your ultimate charge with each shot. You cannot fire the weapon without ultimate energy. I have serious problems seeing an interesting use case for this weapon. While the base damage is nice, I don't see any class sacrificing the ultimate build up for that. All ultimate abilities are extremely strong and a defining factor when it comes to setting the classes apart. And for situational high weapon burst damage, you have other options that might not be as powerful, but can usually deliver a more sustained damage and are not touching your ultimate build up. I honestly can't see any situation where I would choose this gun, so it goes straight into D tier for me. Maybe draining shield or armor instead of ultimate energy could fix this gun. RGBeam Laser. The RGBeam Laser is an interesting weapon. Solid base damage, decent energy drain and a strong alternating buff that becomes crazy after 6 seconds of constant firing. Problem here is that it takes 6 seconds, which is forever in hectic combat situations for the final buff, and that the recoil becomes really hard to control, so you can only use it against big targets like destroyers and the like. I can see using this with an energy injector and then decimating an Orca corvette or some destroyer. Another problem for this weapon is we do have another legendary beam laser on this list that is much easier to use, so I would put this into the B tier on this list. The Pigeon's Stare. And here comes the aforementioned other beam laser, the Pigeon's Stare. Really solid and easy to use weapon, high base damage but also high energy drain. The kicker here is that after 2 seconds of hitting the same target you get a straight 30% damage buff and a 50% energy refund if you destroy the target during this phase. As a beam laser with evenly spread damage, this weapon is useful in all combat scenarios and the 2 seconds will kick in quickly, even when you have a lot going on like in rifts or high risk areas. There's also no recoil penalty. A gunship with this beast melts targets and can constantly get 50% weapon energy back, making this one of the best all-around weapons that is useful for really all classes. I would put this straight into S tier because of the combination between being very powerful and super easy to use to profit from the unique weapon feature. Crimson Sun. Another top tier legendary weapon is the Crimson Sun flag. One of the legendary items that you can also obtain through a questline before even hitting maximum level. The flag has a high base damage, a little less than a powerful Penumbra flag with a slightly higher energy drain. The unique feature is a small supernova on direct hits that covers a large area and deals some chunky damage. I really like flags as the I fart in your general direction to kill you weapons in this game. The Crimson Sun's special ability is very useful, hits hard and not that difficult to trigger. It also melts big targets due to the double damage from regular hits and the supernova effect. The downside are the high energy drain and that you can kill yourself easily if you use this carelessly in close quarter combat. Trust me, I killed myself with my own flag more than I want to admit. Overall, a solid A tier, on par with the Final Reckoning autocannon. Bird's Nest. The last weapon on this list is the Bird's Nest mine launcher, a mine thrower that generates huge areas of deadly laser beams. On paper, I first thought it would be a rather mediocre weapon. Mines in general are not a weapon type I really prefer, but after I saw how big the zones are, I changed my mind quickly. The damage is not very effective against big targets, but you can create some nice kill zones for your regular enemies with this weapon. The downside are the unprecise nature of the mines, like with mines in general, and 12 shots are quickly spent. Of course, bomber pilots don't have to worry about that, making this a very interesting weapon choice for this class. Overall, I would rank this as a solid B tier. Definitely an A tier if you command a bomber. Terminal Velocity. Moving on to the legendary equipment slots. Terminal Velocity is the only legendary booster in the game. Solid base stats and an additional dash ability for quick repositioning. The energy restore effect turns this also into a very efficient booster. I would generally call this unique ability pretty useful, but in the end you have only 2 legendary slots available, and so this effect has to compete with all the other legendary features, making it more a nice to have than a I really need that stuff ability. Especially useful for striker pilots or any close quarter combat setups. I would rank this as a solid B tier. Nothing special, but also not bad. As the first of 2 cargo units, Bob gives you a permanent drone companion called Bob that respawns after 30 seconds if it gets killed. Interestingly, both legendary cargo units follow a similar idea. Bob is a pretty decent fighter and it is always nice to draw some fire away from you. It can also serve as your 7th drone for Vindicator pilots, pretty hilarious. A permanent combat drone is really always useful for all classes. The damage is okay, but nothing spectacular, and distracting some enemies is also nice. In summary, a solid A tier for me. Wrath of the Fallen. The other legendary cargo unit is Wrath of the Fallen. Instead of a permanent ally, you have a 40% chance to revive a killed enemy that then will fight at your side for 10 seconds before exploding. Again, this fits the class theme for Vindicator pilot as the necromancers of this game best, but also turns every other class into a mini necromancer on its own. When compared to Bob, I think these 2 units are pretty much interchangeable. Their abilities offer roughly the same benefits, only triggered differently. I would not see any of the cargo units superior, which puts Wrath of the Fallen also into the already stacked A tier. Nexus Heart. The first of the 2 legendary energy cores is the Nexus Heart that will drain energy from enemies within 200 meters. On paper, not that bad, but I think the range restriction makes this useless in most cases. Even as a striker pilot, you will struggle to have enemies within 200 meters and benefit from the feature. The general focus on boost power output on this unit implies that it was designed with the striker class in mind. I don't see where I would take this energy core over other options and definitely wouldn't waste a precious legendary slot for it. The niche use case for striker or extreme close quarter combat pilots prevents it from being a D tier. C tier it is, for me at least. Thundercore. The other energy core on this list is in a better place in my opinion. Thundercore will let EMP afflicted targets shock every other enemy within 300 meters for some significant damage. The more enemies, the more damage. The EMP device is a must-have in this game, and the Sentinel class can also trigger EMPs with its ultimate. Especially for device-oriented classes like the Sentinel or Stinger, this is a very tempting feature. In high-risk areas or rifts with the densely packed enemies, this legendary can put out some chunky damage. It is a bit limited by the small range. The core overall does not feature the best base output, especially for weapons, and it is useless for anyone who is not utilizing the EMP. So at the end of the day, I would see this in a very solid B tier spot. Omni Manus. Let's move to the two excellent legendary platings in this game. Omni Manus turns your missile defense system into a deadly weapon. It's like a mini gunship turret. Range is 380 meters, it has a short cooldown and is active for a long time. That can even be prolonged when you set the device to sustenance. Hits on enemies do not count for sustenance, by the way, but in high risk areas or rifts you will usually encounter enemy missiles on a regular base. This plating is a real game changer for doing high lunacy rifts. On my gunship I use this in the downtime of the turret to fill up the ultimate quickly and just wade into enemies, popping EMP and activating the defense system. Usually I can manage to have either the turret or the Omni Manus effect active. In addition, this plating has the highest base value in the game, providing close to 100k armor for a tier 4 gunship. Hands down, one of the best legendary items in the game, S tier. Pango's Pride. And the other plating is also a real banger. As you can see in most of the footage, I used the cloaking effect of Pango's Pride to showcase most of the legendary effects. The base armor is not that high, but the cloaking effect is really strong. It might be mostly useless in high risk areas or rifts, but in any sort of open world exploration and combat, this is very cool and useful. Sneaking up and affecting targets with a virus, or teleporting around to move into the perfect striking distance. I really love this legendary. Vindicator pilots could sit back and watch their drones doing the job, scout pilots can cloak without using their ultimate, and so on. A tier overall for me. S tier in the open world, and more a B tier in high risk areas and rifts, depending on your class. Cassiel's Protection. With 3 legendary shields in this game, Cassiel's Protection easily wins the race for this slot in my opinion. It offers the highest base value in this game, turning sentinels and bombers into huge shield tanks. Especially sentinels with a high expertise stat become incredibly tanky. Once your shield breaks, 2 decoys spawn. These have unlimited health and no timer. They persist until the shield is back up again. I tested this in my Lunacy 500 rift runs on my gunship and can confidently say that the 2 decoys take a lot of heat from you. It is always useful for all classes and the ability is really strong. You can counter the rather long shutdown time with your personal perks. Easily a S tier legendary item. Which is a little unfortunate for the other shields, because they cannot really compete with Cassiel's Protection for that slot. SH8495, for example, is a very odd item on this list. The buff you gain in exchange for not having a shield at all is bound to a certain range. And in addition, it is not a flat damage reduction, but a meager 10% chance to not take damage at all. So you are constantly playing the lottery with your life at stake and need to stay within 800 meters to participate in this lottery at all. Even as a complete armor tank, I would not use this item at all. Maybe I'm missing something, but one of the most useless legendary items we have in the game. D tier. Toxic Revenger. The last legendary shield is the Toxic Revenger. some okayish base stats paired with the effect to gain a charge of Toxic Revenge that let you apply corrosion damage with your weapon hits. To trigger this effect, you need to take shield damage of at least 10% of the total shield capacity. Corrosion damage is in general not that useful, because a short time to kill is much more important than slowly burning down your enemy's health. You simply don't have time for that in high risk areas or rifts. The corrosion damage is also bound to your weapon's kinetic damage and very low in my opinion, so you need to take damage to gain some very small damage buff. Not a great benefit, especially with so many stronger options available. It might have some situational usage and it is not as bad as SH8495, so I will put it into the C tier. Eye of the Storm. Lastly, we have two legendary sensors on this list. The first is Eye of the Storm, that will turn your secondary weapon hits into critical hits as long as your ultimate charge is below 50%. Maybe this was designed to have some synergies with the Devotion coil gun and might be appealing to bomber pilots. Problem is that the ultimate quickly surpasses the 50% mark, turning this into a very situational damage buff that is easily outperformed by the Final Reckoning autocannon's 500% damage buff for secondary weapon hits. Not very appealing overall. C tier in my opinion. Visions of Decay. The final item is Visions of Decay that amplifies the damage of the corrosion injector by 100% and affects 3 more targets within 300 meters. A rather niche use case, but can turn the affected device into a very lethal weapon. Especially interesting for device-oriented playstyles with the Sentinel or Stinger. Because of the strong buff, although being rather niche, I would place this into the B tier. So that was a rather extensive list, and the acquiring of all the items took me way longer than expected. If you are hunting down the last 2 legendary items and just getting constantly items you already have, it can become really frustrating. But I'm glad I could provide you with a complete overview in a somewhat timely manner. Let me know of all the cool combinations for the legendary items that I missed down below in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video and thank you very much for watching. This is all for now about Everspace 2. Take good care of yourself and enjoy hunting down your own legendaries.